Hello and welcome. This is our pre-budget debate, our pre-budget special. Technically, it's 1 year and 3 months or a little bit more to the next general election. If you look at it non-technically, purely politically, or in terms of possibilities, they say the election could happen anywhere after 3 months. So it's going to be a very open-ended situation right now. And when in this kind of an open-ended situation, the finance minister stands up to present the budget, the possibilities are endless. To take us through the various possibilities, put them in the correct macroeconomic and political perspective, our editor politics and editor economy. With me in the studio, Navika, thanks. She's with us in Mumbai. And joining us from locations outside, from Delhi, we have Bibek Debroy, noted economist, consulting editor of the Economic Times, Swaminathan Iyer, Dr. Omkar Goswami of SERG Advisory, also one of the most respected voices on the Indian macroeconomic situation, and Lord Meghnad Desai is joining us from our studios in Westminster in London. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Let's open the floor up, Navika. My first question to you is, as you take us through the questions going forward, is when we look at a budget that's going to happen in this kind of a politically charged environment, you wear two hats, Navika. You wear the hat of editor politics, you're also the editor economy. Which hat would you put up first when you look at a situation such as this?
Well, Arnav, there's only one way at looking at budgets in India, and that's the political economy of the budget. The political economy is something even more pronounced in a pre-election year, and especially at a time like this, it's also the man in the hot seat, P. Chidambaram. How's he going to look at the budget? Of course, elections are around the corner, whichever way you look at it. It is May 2014, which is the real time, but many people expecting it to happen sometime around the end of 2013. So will this be the last budget before elections? That's the big picture in which Chidambaram will stand up to present his budget on the 28th of February. And what he's going to be looking at is, he's a stickler for numbers. He's going to be looking over his shoulder at the credit rating agencies, which are looking at the galloping expenditure and the rising fiscal deficit. But he's also going to be looking at what he can give to the Aam Aadmi, to the middle classes, who he really needs to woo in a pre-election year. And he's also going to look at issues that will need to spur up the growth of the economy, something that's a big worry for both the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister.
So let's take up the questions then. My first question to our panel, and we'll follow the debate format. I'd like to go to Lord Meghnad Desai, because he's the farthest, not mentally from us, but physically on this show. Lord Desai, let's put the numbers out. Will he focus on fiscal correction? Does he have the luxury of trying to control the fiscal deficit with the food security bill and Narega and other expenses getting precedence? Do you think he can manage the deficit?
Well, I think he can only manage a deficit if he cuts out a lot of non-planned expenditure. There are noises that he is going to do that, but unless he promises to cut the deficit seriously, the Reserve Bank of India will not lower interest rates. And if the RBI does not lower interest rate, the middle classes will not feel better off because they're suffering from inflation. So his dilemma is, does he go for reduction of deficit and relieve the middle classes, or does he give away a big bonanza of subsidies and wrecks the deficit and hopes that that will get him the good points from the Congress leadership? So I think it's a difficult job Chidambaram faces, and I hope that he goes for the deficit cutting.
What do you think, Swami?
I am very clear. It is not difficult to cut the fiscal deficit, provided two things happen. First, you need to re-energize GDP growth. If GDP growth goes up from 5% this year to 6.5% next year, that gives you a very considerable amount of additional revenue. So a focus on growth and getting down the fiscal deficit come to the same thing. Second, the deregulation we are getting of diesel. Well, if you look at that trend, I think that could save you 40,000 crores next year compared with this year. That again is a substantial decrease and does help you meet your fiscal target of 4.8%. I think I want to add that the most important thing in an election year is that inflation must be brought under control.
Yes.
For inflation to be brought under control, Chidambaram is very clear, we must avoid a credit downgrade by the international rating agencies. If they downgrade us, money flows out of India, the rupee crashes from 55 to 60 to the rupee, all import prices go up, and inflation hits 15%. The biggest disaster for politically would be a downgrade. So I think it's a rare case, this particular budget, that what the Aam Aadmi wants, which is the taming of inflation, and what the international rating agencies and investors want, which is, once again, a return to a normal path, which would then enable inflation to come down, which would enable interest rates to come down. I think there is a convergence between what the Aam Aadmi would want and what the international investors want. That's what he's going to go for. The over and above, I mean, in every budget, finance minister makes sure there is no vote bank left behind. So much for scheduled castes, so much for scheduled tribes, the special dispensation for Muslims, this for a backward region. It's quite easy to give a large number of small little fiddling things to different places. And it's possible to do a lot of that via the banking system. So that while he appears to be doing a lot, the money doesn't necessarily come out of the budget, but comes out of the banking system. So this, I think, is going to be the overall thrust. Get the fiscal deficit down. The important part of it is going to be you regenerate foreign confidence, investor confidence, and you get the growth.
Right.
Because of that, the rupee strengthens, inflation comes down.
Right. Let me also draw in Omkar Goswami at this stage. Omkar, we're looking at Chidambaram addressing the credit rating agencies, also addressing the own FRBM Act, the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act that he himself had notified in 2005. But we're also looking at Chidambaram providing for a food security bill, subsidies and other dominant parts of the budget remaining where they are, because 56% of the budget really goes towards pensions, subsidies, interest payments. How is Chidambaram likely to juggle all this around?
Well, here's my take on him. In his last stint as finance minister, he had brought down the fiscal deficit and at the end of it quite honestly stated fiscal deficits to 2.6% of GDP. It seems like proto-history, given how his successor increased it in 3 years. But I think Chidambaram is very much focused and has always been focused on bringing the fiscal deficit down, and he has very good arguments about it, that if the government spends significantly more than what it earns, it crowds out investment opportunities, it crowds out private sector investment, it crowds out infrastructure, and it doesn't allow for capital building. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm sure of the fact that he will try very hard for the year that is coming to an end to keep it to about 5.3% of GDP, as he has said.
Yeah, but
I think he's going
to
also come up with some pretty good proposals, I think, to keep it down to 4.8 in the next year. As far as the food security bill is concerned, Navika, it is overstated. Even though it's election year, it's not going to cost more than 5,000, 6,000 crore for the next year. It'll be much higher the year after, but for the next year, it's not going to be much more than 7,000, 8,000.
No, but what's the political bonus? Chidambaram had always
budgets do not cause political bonus.
But there has to be one
are forgotten.
This year.
You have to, no, budgets don't. I have not heard of a budget that has won anyone seats. I have heard of budgets that have lost seats, but not budgets that have won seats.
No, what about, for example, no, I get your point, but what about, for example, Bibek Debroy, the farm loan waiver, 2008, there was farm loan waiver 1, you can't have farm loan waiver 2 this time, but it's again a pre-election year, and so was 2008.
Well, I have sort of 4 points to make before I answer that question. The first one is the budget is only one particular instrument. So we cannot expect the budget to address issues of either slowdown in growth or inflation. These are things that need to be addressed outside the budget, and unfortunately I think this present government has left it too late. The second point is that I disagree a little bit with Navika that Mr. Chidambaram may be a stickler for numbers, but he is not always necessarily honest about the numbers. One example of that was in the year 2008. I hope this time, particularly because the fiscal deficit is going to be so scrutinized, that he is going to be a bit more honest about the numbers and is not going to resort to statistical jugglery. The third point I want to make is particularly because of the external credit rating agencies, I think it's extremely important that he's going to stick to the 4.8% target. Where I disagree a little bit with Dr. Desai is that I don't think he's going to do that by slashing non-plan expenditure. He's going to do that by slashing plan expenditure. And we can debate whether that's desirable or not, but that's essentially what he's going to do, slash the plan expenditure. And I hope he does not overestimate nominal GDP growth, as Swami mentioned, or overestimate revenue and underestimate expenditure. I quite agree with Omkar that I don't think the food subsidy issue is an important one for this budget. In fact, I won't be very surprised if he doesn't budget at all. On Arnab's question, it's not a question of whether something actually delivers votes or not. But the fact of the matter is that incorrectly, in my view, the present dispensation thought that the farm loan waiver, the MGNREGS, it paid electoral dividends, and therefore in this time round also the food subsidy bill, which as I said will not be budgeted for, but that food subsidy bill will be perceived to yield electoral dividends.